Right now, my main medium is woodblock printing. I love other types of printmaking too, especially when I was in school. I got really into stone lithography, and I was obsessed with that medium for a while. I also dabbled in intaglio printing, etchings on copper, aquatints, etc. And I really enjoy that too. I always say one of these days, those techniques are going to take over my focus again. But since COVID, I've become pretty invested in woodblock prints, especially color woodblock prints. I was 17 when I got into printmaking. I had only been seriously considering myself as an artist for about a year at that time, and I had a particular drawing style I had developed. It was almost entirely big flowing shapes and patterns and line work, mostly in black and white, and it was very graphic. I didn't have much technical ability yet at that time, but I had a steady hand and I loved getting lost in the line work for hours on end. I would push the lines as close together as possible and try to make them perfect, and it was an escape for me. At that time, I was looking at applying to art schools, and I was looking at degree programs, trying to figure out where I fit. I didn't know how to paint, and I didn't really know how to draw anything realistic. I didn't like sculpture. I never liked doing anything on a computer. I just had my line work. But then I saw printmaking, and the images immediately captivated me. I got really curious, so I looked into printmaking techniques, and to be honest, I couldn't understand any of it at all. But then I saw relief printing, and that one I could comprehend a little bit. I was like, oh, you just carve a stamp, that makes sense. I could probably do that. And so I learned how to make linoleum prints. I think mostly I did it by myself. I believe I Googled it and just went and got cheap tools and a little linoleum block and just tried to do it. I remember my dad tried to help me print the first time, and we ruined my mom's good rolling pin. Skateboarding came long before all of that. I started skating when I was 12 years old. I was initially motivated by boredom. I was bored of my friends, bored of my other hobbies, bored of school. I had a game on Nintendo DS called Skate It, which is like an offshoot of the Skate series. I played it obsessively, and it made me want to skate so bad. The day I started skating for real was on spring break in 6th grade. I was sitting at home and I decided I wanted to learn how to ollie, so I watched some YouTube videos, got my brother's old board from the garage, and went out into the backyard and started trying. Learning to ollie is really hard. I had tried before and always given up, but on that day I kept trying. I was out there for hours. I called my dad out to ask him if I was getting off the ground. He held up his finger and thumb and he was like, this much. I couldn't believe it. I was so stoked. I started skating every day after that, completely hooked. I didn't want to do anything else, much to my parents' dismay. I quit all other sports and activities they had me in so I could just skate. No doubt skating has had a lot of influence on my art, and they definitely tie together. It's not that I make art about skating, but it influences the way that I work and the way that I think more than anything. I feel like people who don't skate sometimes don't really understand how skating is truly a very creative outlet. No one is telling you what to do, there's no set goal for you to achieve. Just you and your skateboard interpreting the world around you. Skaters look at the world like artists, seeing possibilities everywhere. And it's also extremely difficult. Failure is a constant in skating. Honestly, most of skating is failing to land tricks. You become used to it, analyzing your failures to learn and achieve new things. When I make an image that's really complicated and challenging, I think of it like I'm battling a trick. It might be painful and frustrating to challenge yourself that much, but the reward is always worth it. I don't think there's a direct tie between skating and the imagery that I choose to make most of the time. Maybe sometimes in an abstract way, but they're kind of like a yin-yang in my life. Art for me is not very spontaneous. I'm very methodical. I'm mostly interested in executing a vision that I have. Skating is kind of the opposite. Some of it is premeditated, especially if I'm filming, but it's mostly pretty off the cuff, just responding to the world around me. Making art is my calling in life, but I think I can't just make art. If I don't get my energy out skating, I just can't sit still long enough to make these pieces. So they're both very necessary creative pursuits for me in different ways. My art is influenced by a lot of different things. Where I live and where I'm from definitely come into it, but also my feelings and experiences. I came to that decision about being an artist in a weird way. My mental health has always had its ups and downs, but when I was a teenager, things got really bad for me. I was spiraling down, doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, getting in trouble with the law. At the time, no one could really help me. Skating was my only outlet, and I skated a lot back then. That was when I first started getting good. But at that time, it wasn't enough. I'd become incredibly nihilistic and hopeless. My parents were naturally very afraid. Ultimately, they made a choice that irrevocably changed my life, and they had me sent to wilderness therapy. Early one morning, I was woken up by two huge men. They told me I had a plane to catch. They had been hired by my family to take me away. I was terrified, but I felt so hopeless and backed into a corner in my life at the time that I just said fuck it and went with them quietly. It's not like I would have been able to fight them anyway. They would only let me take the clothes I was wearing. I'll never forget going through airport security with no belongings. My kidnappers delivered me to some people from the program in Durango. At first they were nice, but then they brought me to a house in the middle of nowhere and intimidated me so I would submit to an invasive strip search. They took away all my clothes and gave me new ones. They gave me a makeshift backpack made of a tarp, some string, and a seatbelt strap, which weighed 80 pounds. We got back in the car, and they told me I could either lay down in the back or be blindfolded. They took me far into the desert and dropped me off with a group of kids with backpacks like mine and two adults. They informed me that I would not be allowed to speak for several days, and then we started hiking. I spent 10 weeks in wilderness therapy, hiking endlessly. We were somewhere deep in the desert of southeastern Utah, a quite desolate landscape of mostly sandstone, sage fields, and stunted trees. I think about that place all the time. The experience was made even more surreal because they would not tell me where I was or even what time it was. The wasteland is always finding its way into my art. I went straight from wilderness to a residential facility. In the end, I was away from home in troubled teen programs for just over a year. The experience was incredibly traumatic, but it was here that my journey as an artist began. I was trapped in a horrible and emotionally manipulative environment, desperate for some sort of escape. But I couldn't skate, I couldn't even read a book at first, but I could draw. So I started by filling pages with lines and patterns, and then I started making things out of them. I wanted the work to take up as much time as possible, so I made it more and more detailed. It was my quiet, private rebellion, and it also gave me a way to process my emotions. At that time, making art was about survival. I became extremely passionate about it, and it gave me hope for the future. After high school, I was itching to get away and start fresh somewhere. I landed on Portland because of the skate scene and because of the printmaking department at PNCA. I was hungry to learn about it. I was really curious. So I put as much time into the studio as possible in my 4 years in school. I think I approach art like a skater. I just wanted to get good. I wanted to develop my imagery. Printmaking is really hard too, and when you're trying to do technical stuff, it could get really intense and really physical. There's a lot of ways that you can mess up and a lot of things that you have to look out for. In the past, I've pushed myself too far. I've been too dedicated to my imagery at the expense of my mental health and my physical well-being. But I've learned over the years that I have to be careful not to approach it too much like a gnarly skateboarder. You can't just battle endlessly. You have to rein it in a little bit sometimes and come back to fight another day. When I moved away from home, I had a lot of opportunities to get to know myself better. Art is a big part of that. I've always been really inspired by the things that I read. I'm very interested in sci-fi and fantasy stories. That becomes fuel for my daydreaming, which I've learned to lean into to create surreal imagery. I think a lot about Carl Jung and some of his ideas about collective unconscious and archetypes and things like that. So I see my art partly as a way to explore those parts of myself and get to know them better. There's a lot of darker emotions in my art. There's a lot of sadness in it, and there's a lot of loneliness. Sometimes there's a lot of anger. But I try to have hope in there as well. I finished my degree at the end of 2019, and I was trying to figure out what to do after graduation. But then COVID hit and everything shut down, and I lost studio access. I went through a lot of unstable life circumstances for a while where I was just trying to figure things out. Moving from job to job, moving houses a lot, not having consistent studio time, being broke. My ultimate goal was always just to get to a point where I could consistently make art. I've finally gotten to a place recently, within the last year and a half or so, where I've got a consistent job and a good studio space. I want to shout out Flight 64. That's my printmaking studio. I really love that studio. It's one of the coolest things that I found in Portland. And things in Portland are working right now. I'm finally able to consistently make stuff, and it feels really good. I've worked hard to get here, and I've got some financial stability. I'm still broke as hell, but things aren't so bad. I think even if I started to have a career where I could just make art all the time, I would probably still want to do something else, like a few days a week. Even if it was just some volunteer thing or some random job like that. Something to enforce a routine. Having to be somewhere at a specific time is really good for me. Sometimes when you have endless free time, it's not great for you as an artist. It's kind of the same for skaters sometimes too. I've seen people say online, oh, all the best skaters have jobs. And that's kind of true. And a lot of the best artists out there are people who are down and dirty, working in the service industry, working in kitchens, and then they go bust their ass in the studio after work. And those are the real ones. But at the end of the day, printmaking and making woodblock prints is my passion. I feel like making art is my life's work, and whether or not it works out in a financial way, it's just what I want to do. When I look back on my life and all that I've been through to get here, I know that my younger self would be so happy. I still feel like I'm doing this for the trapped kid that I used to be. This was his dream. At times I even think of it as a collaboration. My inner child brings forth images from somewhere deep within me, and I make them real so we can see what they have to say. All I know is I'm just immensely grateful for all that art and skateboarding have brought me in my life. I love my community. I just want to keep engaging with everyone who's creating out here and keep building. It feels like what I'm meant to do.